Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Viewers, this is Waqar Corby, and today we are going to discuss a very important and critical issue, and that is de-dollarization. Although not much is being talked about it in Pakistan, but I think around the globe this is becoming a very hot topic for discussion, and there are reasons for that. It's important to note why last year and 2023 became critical in terms of de-dollarization. As you know, the Russia-Ukraine war has taken almost 1 year, and it has basically affected definitely Eastern Europe and Euro-Atlantic countries and organizations. But what happened was that Russia was put into sanctions. There were a lot of sanctions put on Russia by the United States and European Union, and then they were applied globally. So what happened was that their facility for transactions through SWIFT was stopped. Then of course we saw the Nord Stream being sabotaged. Still there's a lot of discussion what happened. So that affected the energy supply to Europe. And then came the energy and food crisis, because if you look at Russia and Ukraine and the battle area or the battle space east of the Dnieper River, this was one of the a very productive wheat producing area. So it did create a food crisis also. So all told, Russia suffered a lot initially, but then since it's a major energy producer in terms of oil and gas, it decided to find a way out. Since SWIFT was blocked, so they went for exchange of their energy in currencies other than dollar, and that was, I think, a compulsion. So if you look at larger importers like China, then you have India. I think even Pakistan is looking for some imports of cheap oil from Russia. And then there are so many other countries also. So they started trading in, let's say, bilaterally in different currencies than dollar. And now there is a news that even Saudi Arabia is considering selling oil in currencies other than dollar. So this is one reason that this was an impact, and the developing world and even the rising powers, even the BRICS countries, felt that in case tomorrow they have some problem with the United States and it puts sanctions, it freezes their assets in dollars. So what do? So they went for alternate currency. The other was the US economy itself. Now if you look at the US debt, I think it's more than $32 trillion. So it's a heavily indebted economy, and it also created, in the international system. Now there are also voices coming from smaller countries, middle level powers, and even important countries. Like I will just quote voices coming from Africa. We had the Kenyan president telling those who were hoarding dollars that they could stop it because the new market will be very different market. I think this video came last week. Then we had South African ex-president Thabo Mbeki, who's I think one of the best presidents that South Africa had after Mandela. He is also, I think, agreed that in case there are two big countries who want to trade, why they should do it in dollars. So there's talk of de-dollarization. I was also going through a video by Gonzalo Lira. So he's I think a renowned commentator, although not liked by the Western countries. But he's come up with a logic of the impacts of de-dollarization. So hence onward, the discourse on what happens is mostly based on what Gonzalo said, but I'll like to make it convenient and easier. He has stated that, of course, he's given the history, how after bitoon system you had basically dollar as the reserve currency for trade and commerce, especially oil in 70s, and how then US actually weaponized it against different countries through sanctions. So he then explains what will happen. Now what was happening, that those countries who were earning dollar, for instance China, let's say, I think they have more than $1 trillion, or Japan, or even Middle Eastern countries, I think again combined have a reserve of more than $1 trillion. What they were doing, were not keeping it in their banks, but then buying US stocks and definitely assets in other countries, and then of course doing trade. So it meant that basically this idea of dollar as a reserve currency was supported by these large countries. Now when the de-dollarization starts, Gonzalo feels that the money will start shifting. For instance, let's say China and Arab countries are trading in yuan. And so there is a reserve of yuan being, let's say, gathered or piled in Middle East. So what do? Are they going to keep it in the banks? Yes, limited quantity, but otherwise then they're going to start buying the Chinese stocks or the Chinese assets. So definitely the yuan is then going to come out. So it means that they will take out their investment from the stocks in New York Stock Exchange or Nasdaq or whatever, and then start diverting it to Russia or China or let's say Middle East. So it will be definitely become a pressure that US then tries to start printing more dollars to sustain it within the United States. But ultimately, people are going to look at alternate markets. So one, there will be shift. The other is the question: is the slide down of let's say dollar going to be gradual or is going to be a very steep, let's say, slide into, as people say, the all the way gorge? I feel that it could be initially a gradual process, and I think that's how Gonzalo also says. But later on, as people start, taking out, the assets from American, let's say, stock exchange and stocks, and let's say sovereign bonds and all that, it's going to basically become, it's going to create a snowball effect. So that means that then slide going to be very, very fast. So what is my advice to our own, let's say, audience within Pakistan? One is to understand and communicate that this is coming. So this is inevitable. The other is, let's say, how we can become the part of international market. Does Pakistan economy have that strength that it can, one switch from this reserve currency to other? How much, let's say, Pakistani debt in dollars will be eased? Definitely when the dollar starts losing its value. But definitely we're going to look at markets like China, Russia and Middle East. Maybe look at currencies. So these are the currencies that may draw some attraction. So all told, I think this is very, very important. The de-dollarization has started, and it's high time that we understand it and then communicate it to general public and people especially who are in business, and see the pros and cons. Of course, when there's a transition, there could be gains and losses, and we have to see it for ourselves. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I expect comments for improvement and your input. Khuda Hafiz.